15 neighbors were watching when my son threw my bag onto the porch steps, revved the SUV engine, and let the exhaust smoke blow directly toward me. Then said, "You are not family on this trip. You are a burden." My daughter-in-law rolled up the window and added, "Don't ruin our vacation." I said nothing. I watched 3 cars leave my driveway. Then I walked inside, picked up the phone, and called the real estate office. When they arrived, everything changed completely. "I am so grateful you're spending time with Dad's revenge stories. Before we dive deeper, drop a comment telling me your city and country. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Also, please note, this story includes some fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing names or settings is purely coincidental, but the message I'm conveying to you is useful. There were 15 people watching when my son told me I was a burden. I know the exact number because I counted them afterwards standing alone in my driveway, while the exhaust fumes from 3 SUVs still hung in the morning air. 15 neighbors. 15 people who had watched me build this house with my own hands 32 years ago, who had eaten my barbecue on 4th of July, and borrowed my tools and waved at me from across the street on quiet Sunday mornings. 15 people who now looked away at their phones, at the sky, at anything except the old man standing on his own driveway with nowhere to go. My name is Walter Greer. I am 67 years old. I am a retired civil engineer, a widower of 6 years, and until 9 o'clock on the morning of July 19th, I believed I was a father. It started the way most devastating things do, quietly, without warning, dressed up as something ordinary. Ethan had announced the trip 2 weeks earlier. A resort up the coast, 4 days, the whole family. I assumed I was included. I had always been included. When Margaret was alive, we never took a trip without her calling to confirm I had packed enough, without her saving me the window seat. But Margaret had been gone for 6 years, and somewhere in those 6 years, the definition of family had been quietly rewritten without my knowledge. I came downstairs that morning at 8:30 with my overnight bag packed. Navy blue, the one Margaret had given me for our 30th anniversary. I had folded everything neatly the night before: 2 shirts, 1 pair of slacks, my medication, the small framed photo of Margaret I take everywhere. I was ready. The driveway looked like a staging area for an expedition. 3 vehicles: Ethan's black SUV, the one I had put 70% of the down payment on 18 months ago, when he said the lease on his old car had expired and he was short on cash. Behind it, Claire's silver crossover packed to the roof with matching luggage sets I had never seen before. And at the back, a rented minivan that I assumed was for extra space. Donald and Sandra Whitmore were already outside. Claire's parents. Donald was 64, broad-shouldered, with the practiced handshake of a man who had spent his life making sure everyone in the room knew he had arrived. Sandra stood beside him in a linen blouse, overseeing the loading of their bags, with the quiet authority of someone who had never once carried her own luggage. They did not look at me when I walked out. "Ethan." I set my bag down near the rear of the SUV. "Is there room?" My son turned. He was 38 years old, and he was wearing a polo shirt I had never seen before. Pale blue, expensive-looking, the kind of shirt a man wears when he is trying to impress someone. He looked at my bag. He looked at me, and something moved across his face that I had not seen before. Something quick and calculating there, and gone in less than a second. "Dad." His voice was careful, measured. "You should stay home." I thought I had misheard him. "I'm sorry. The trip." He gestured vaguely at the vehicles. "It's really just for family this time. You'd be more comfortable here." The words landed wrong. I stood there trying to locate the logic in them. I was his father. I was family. I had been family since the moment he was born, since I held him in the delivery room with my hands shaking so badly The nurse asked if I needed to sit down. I opened my mouth to say exactly that. That was when the rear window of the black SUV slid down. Donald Whitmore was settled into the back seat with the ease of a man who had been expecting the window seat all along. The leather was cream-colored and spotless. There was a small cooler at his feet and a travel pillow propped behind his neck. Sandra sat beside him, her sunglasses already on her hands folded in her lap. She looked out at me with an expression I can only describe as satisfied, the expression of a woman who had arranged the seating chart and was pleased with how it had turned out. There was room in that vehicle. I could see it clearly. The third row seat, folded flat to accommodate luggage that could easily have been redistributed, could have held me without any difficulty whatsoever. I was looking at the space where I should have been sitting. Ethan lowered his voice, but not enough. "Dad, don't make this awkward." "I'm not making anything." My own voice came out steadier than I felt. "I'm asking a straightforward question. You'll slow us down." He reached for my bag, lifting it from the ground. For one strange moment, I thought he was going to load it into the car. Instead, he carried it 3 steps to the right and set it on the front porch step. He set it down the way you set down something you no longer need. "Stay home. We'll call you when we get there." He got into the SUV without looking back. The engine turned over with a low rumble, and for a moment the exhaust drifted directly toward where I was standing, warm and acrid in the July air, before the vehicle pulled forward and joined the others. Claire had been standing near her crossover, pretending to check something on her phone. She did not pretend anymore. She looked directly at me, and her voice, when it came, was pleasant in the way that a closing door is pleasant. Final quiet decided. "Don't ruin our trip, Walter." She got into her car. The door closed with a soft, expensive click. Ethan looked at me for one more second. I searched his face for something: hesitation, apology, the flicker of a boy who had once climbed into my lap during thunderstorms and pressed his face against my shoulder. I found nothing I recognized. "I'll call you Tuesday," he said. He got into the SUV. The engine started. Donald Whitmore's window slid back up. I stood in the driveway, and I watched all 3 vehicles back out in sequence, smooth and coordinated, as if it had been rehearsed. Ethan pulled out first. He did not look back. The minivan followed. Claire's crossover went last, and as it turned the corner, I saw her check her mirror once, not to look at me, but to check her own reflection, touching the side of her hair with 2 fingers, before the car disappeared from view. The street was quiet. 15 neighbors who had been watching from their yards and porches and driveways slowly returned to their own lives. Jim Haverford, across the street, went back inside without a word. The Peterson woman pretended to water her already watered begonias. Harold Burton, who had lived next door for 30 years and who I considered my closest friend on this street, stood at the edge of his yard and looked at me with an expression I could not read. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He went back inside. I stood there alone. The navy bag sat on the porch step where Ethan had placed it. The morning was warm and cloudless, a perfect July day, the kind of day that has no business being the backdrop for what had just happened. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler was running. A dog was barking at something important only to itself. I looked at the tire tracks Ethan's SUV had left on the concrete. The same concrete I had poured myself in the summer of 1993 on my hands and knees in the July heat. Margaret bringing me iced tea every hour and telling me I was doing it wrong and being absolutely correct about that. I had re-poured that section twice before I got it right. I bent down and picked up my overnight bag. I walked back into the house. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and sat at the table where I had eaten breakfast alone for the past 6 years. The house was very quiet. It had been quiet for a long time, but this was a different kind of quiet. This was the quiet of a place that had finally finished telling me something I had been too stubborn to hear. I sat with my coffee, and I thought about the night before, about the conversation I had not been meant to overhear, about a voice carrying down a dark hallway, while I stood in the shadows and learned exactly what my son thought of me. That was when I knew what I was going to do. The night before, I had gone to bed at 10 o'clock, the way I always do. Margaret used to tease me about it. She would stay up past midnight reading her paperback mysteries, and I would be asleep before the 11 o'clock news finished. And in the morning, she would tell me everything I had missed, as if she were filing a report. I had not broken the habit in the 6 years since she passed. 10 o'clock, lights out, the same side of the bed, the same thin pillow she always said was not thick enough, and that I had stubbornly refused to replace. Because replacing it felt like admitting something I was not ready to admit. I woke at 2 in the morning because I was thirsty. This was not unusual. I keep a glass of water on the nightstand, but I had forgotten to fill it before bed. And at 67, my throat goes dry in the night with a persistence that no amount of reminding myself seems to fix. I pulled on my robe, the old gray one with the frayed left cuff that Ethan had given me for Christmas 11 years ago, back when gifts still meant something, and I opened my bedroom door. The hallway was dark. The house was quiet in the way old houses are quiet at night, full of small sounds that mean nothing. The settling of wood, the hum of the refrigerator 2 floors below, the faint tick of the grandfather clock Margaret had insisted on buying at an estate sale in Pasadena, and that I had carried up 3 flights of stairs without complaint, because she had looked at it the way she looked at very few things in her life. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard Claire's voice. It was coming from behind the door of the guest room, Ethan and Claire's room, when they stayed, which had been often enough over the past 4 years, that Claire had started keeping a set of toiletries in the bathroom cabinet, as if the arrangement were permanent. The door was not fully closed. A thin line of yellow light ran along the bottom, and through it came her voice, low and deliberate, the voice of a woman, saying something she had been holding in for a while, and had finally decided to release. I stopped walking. I want to be clear about what kind of man I am. I have never gone looking for other people's conversations. I raised Ethan to close doors when he wanted privacy, and to respect closed doors when other people wanted theirs. Margaret and I had disagreements we kept between ourselves behind closed doors, in voices low enough that the neighbors would never know. I believe in privacy the way I believe in property lines clearly marked, mutually respected, but I heard my name. And something in the way Claire said, it made my feet stop moving before my brain had formed any conscious instruction to stop. He's retired, Ethan. Her voice was not angry. That was what struck me first. It was patient, reasonable. The voice of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow to understand. He doesn't contribute anything anymore. He just takes up space and acts like we owe him something for it. There was a pause. I heard the creak of the bed, Ethan shifting his weight. He's my dad, Claire. His voice was quieter than hers, less certain, the voice of a man who had already mostly decided and was only going through the motions of resistance. I know he is. She softened then, and the softening was worse than the sharpness because it was practiced. I had heard that particular softness before at dinner parties, when she wanted something from someone at holiday gatherings, when she was managing her own parents, with the careful efficiency of a woman who understood exactly how people worked, and was not sentimental about applying that understanding. But think about what my parents are going to think. They fly all the way out here, they expect a family trip, and we show up with him. He'll talk about Margaret the whole time. He'll go to bed at 10. He'll make everything about him without meaning to, and my parents will spend the whole trip feeling like guests in someone else's memory. Another pause. Longer this time. "It's just 4 days," Ethan said, but his voice had changed. The resistance was gone. What was left was the voice of a man building himself a justification, laying the boards of it down one at a time, testing each one to make sure it would hold his weight. 4 days is enough to make an impression. Claire's voice dropped lower. I had to hold very still to hear her clearly. Your dad had his time, Ethan. He had his whole life with your mother in that house. But that chapter is over. We're the family now. My parents are the family. And if you want them to take us seriously to take you seriously, then you need to stop letting him tag along like he's still the one running things. What came next was the thing I have turned over in my mind every day since. Ethan did not argue. He did not pause to consider. He did not say, "Let me think about it," or "Maybe you have a point," or any of the 100 half measures a man uses when he knows something is wrong, but lacks the courage to say so plainly. He said, "You're right." 2 words. Spoken quietly without drama, the way a man confirms an appointment or acknowledges a weather forecast. As if what Claire had just said about his father about me was simply a correct observation about the state of things, requiring no more deliberation than the time of a flight or the price of a hotel room. I stood in the dark hallway in my old gray robe, and I felt something move through my chest that I have no clean word for. It was not rage. Rage is hot, and this was cold. The particular cold of realizing that something you believed was solid has been hollow for a long time, and the only thing that has changed is that now you know it. I turned around. I walked back to my room. I closed the door without making a sound. I lay down on my side of the bed. I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling and I listened to the grandfather clock ticking downstairs. The clock Margaret had made me carry up 3 flights without complaint. And I thought about the word family and what it had meant to me for 67 years and what apparently it meant to my son. At some point before dawn, I got up, went to the window, and looked out at the driveway below. 3 vehicles, packed and waiting. I went back to bed. I did not sleep. But somewhere in those dark hours, something in me that had been waiting a very long time finally made up its mind. At 2 in the morning, I gave up pretending I was going to sleep. I had been lying on my back for close to 2 hours, staring at the ceiling, the way a man stares at something he cannot change and cannot stop looking at. The grandfather clock downstairs marked the half hours. The house breathed around me the slow, indifferent breath of walls and beams and 32 years of accumulated living. I pulled back the covers, put on my robe, and went downstairs. The kitchen light was on. I had left it on the way I always did when the house was full, a habit from Ethan's childhood, when he would come downstairs for water in the night, and I did not want him navigating the dark alone. He was 38 years old now, and navigating all kinds of dark just fine without my help. I turned the light off and stood in the sudden quiet of the kitchen. That was when I saw the plates. 4 of them arranged around the table the way I had set them at 6 o'clock that evening. I had cooked dinner bone-in pork chops, the kind Margaret used to request for Sunday supper, with mashed potatoes and green beans from the garden. I had set the table for 4 because Ethan and Claire and the Whitmores were all under my roof, and because cooking for people and setting a proper table was the only language I had ever been fully fluent in when it came to saying I love you without saying it out loud. Nobody had come down. At 6:15 I had heard voices upstairs, laughter, the clink of what sounded like glasses. At 6:30 I had knocked on Ethan's door, and he had called through it that they were ordering something delivered, that they had plans not to wait up. I had gone back to the kitchen and eaten alone, and I had told myself it was fine. It was just one dinner, it did not mean anything. Now standing in the dark at 2 in the morning, looking at 4 untouched plates of food gone cold and stiff, I understood that it meant everything. I covered the plates with dish towels and left them where they were. I would deal with them in the morning. I walked through the kitchen into the living room intending to sit in the armchair by the window the way I sometimes did when sleep would not come, and that was when I saw Claire's phone. It was lying on the coffee table, screen side up. A secondary phone I had noticed her carrying two for the past year. One for personal use, and one she kept mostly for family calls, she had explained once when I asked. The screen was dark, but as I moved past the table, my shadow fell across it, and the display lit up automatically, the way phones do when they sense movement nearby. I was not trying to read it. I want to be clear about that. I am not the kind of man who reads other people's messages, but the notification was there before I could look away, bright white text against a dark background, and my eyes with the trained reflex of 67 years of paying attention to things read it before my conscience could intervene. The message was from Sandra Whitmore. The preview showed the first two lines before the screen dimmed again. Honey, when you get a chance, can you take some photos of the main bedroom and the back garden? Your father wants to get a sense of the square footage. We're just curious what something like that would. The screen went dark. I stood very still. The living room was quiet around me. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling, and then it was gone. I reached out and picked up Claire's phone. I did not unlock it. I did not try to read the rest of the message. I held it in my hand for a moment, feeling the weight of it lighter than it should have been given what it contained. And then I set it back down exactly where it had been, at the same angle in the same position, so that Claire would not know it had been touched. My legs carried me to the far wall before I was fully aware of having decided to move. The family photographs had hung there for 20 years. Margaret had arranged them herself, spending an entire Saturday afternoon with a level and a pencil and more opinions than any wall could reasonably accommodate. There were 12 frames in total. School photos of Ethan at every age from kindergarten through high school. Our wedding portrait, Margaret in a cream dress she had bought off the rack at a department store in Burbank, and altered herself because we could not yet afford what she actually wanted. A photograph of the three of us at the Grand Canyon, Ethan, 12 years old and furious about the hiking. Margaret laughing at something I had said, the canyon enormous and indifferent behind us. And there, the one I was looking for was the photograph from Ethan's 8th birthday. The three of us at the kitchen table, the chocolate cake Margaret had made from scratch in the center. Ethan leaning forward to blow out the candles, his small face lit warm and orange by 8 flames. My hand on his shoulder. Margaret's hand on mine. The frame was turned face down against the wall. I reached up and took it down. I held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time, at Margaret's face, at Ethan's face, at my own younger face, smiling at something that felt, even now, completely real. Then I turned it back around and rehung it on its nail. I looked at it for another moment. Then I reached up, took it down again, and held it against my chest, and stood in the dark living room of the house I had built with my own hands. And for the first time since I had stood in that hallway, listening to my son agree that I was no longer necessary, I let myself feel the full weight of what I was holding. Not just the photograph. Everything. The plates. The phone. The frame turned to face the wall. The window seat that had been given to someone else. 38 years of a boy I had carried, taught, bailed out, believed in. And somewhere along the way, lost without ever seeing the exact moment he slipped away. I set the photograph on the coffee table beside Claire's phone. I went to the kitchen. I sat down at this table in the dark. And I made a decision so clear and so complete that it settled over me like something physical, like the weight of a hand on my shoulder, steady and certain. In a few hours, it would be morning. Ethan would leave, and I would begin. The sun came up at 5:53. I know because I was sitting at the kitchen table watching it happen. My second cup of coffee going cold between my hands, the way Margaret always said, I let my coffee go cold because I was too busy thinking to drink it. She was right about that, the same way she was right about most things involving my worst habits. I watched the light move across the kitchen floor in a slow orange line the way it had moved across that same floor for 32 years. And I thought about all the mornings I had sat in this exact chair and taken that light completely for granted. I had built this house in 1993. I was 35 years old, a newly licensed civil engineer with more confidence than experience, and a young wife who believed in me with a completeness that still 32 years later struck me as slightly miraculous. We had bought the lot on Maplewood Drive for a price that seemed impossible even then, in the way that good things sometimes arrive, before you have fully understood that you deserve them. I drew the plans myself at the kitchen table of our apartment, Margaret leaning over my shoulder with her reading glasses on, asking questions that improved every answer. I poured the foundation in April. I framed the walls through May and June. The summer of 1993 was the hottest on record in this part of California, and I worked through it in a drenched T-shirt with a radio tuned to the country station Margaret liked drinking iced tea she brought out every hour with the punctuality of someone running a construction site rather than watching one. By September, we had a roof. By Thanksgiving, we had walls and windows. By Christmas, we were inside sleeping on an air mattress in the empty master bedroom, laughing at something I cannot remember now, but that felt at the time like the funniest thing either of us had ever heard. Ethan was born the following March. I finished my coffee, stood up, and walked through the house. I did this slowly, the way you move through a place when you are saying goodbye to it, even if you have not yet fully admitted to yourself that goodbye is what you are doing. The living room, first, the oak floors. I had sanded myself 3 times before Margaret declared them acceptable. The fireplace I had rebuilt from the original brick after a minor structural issue in 2004, the window seat she had designed, and that I had built to her exact specifications down to the 1/4 inch. She had spent entire Sunday afternoons in that window seat, with her paperback mysteries, her feet tucked under her, a cup of tea on the sill. The dining room. The table we had bought at an estate sale in Glendale in 1997, solid walnut, too heavy to move without 2 strong people, and a plan, which was probably why it had never moved. The marks on the doorframe where I had tracked Ethan's height every birthday until he hit 6 feet at 17 and declared the tradition embarrassing. The backyard through the sliding glass door. Margaret's garden, which I had maintained since she passed with the grim determination of a man honoring a promise he had made at a graveside, not in words, but in the understood language of staying. The roses she had planted along the south fence. The Meyer lemon tree she had insisted on claiming it would produce fruit within 2 years, being correct about that, as she was correct about most things. I went upstairs, Ethan's old room first. Empty now, except for a twin bed and the desk where he had done homework, and later, when he thought I was asleep, talked to girls on the phone until midnight. The shelf where his Little League trophies had stood for 15 years before Claire had quietly relocated them to a box in the garage during one of their extended stays 3 years ago. I had not said anything about the trophies. I was not sure why, looking back. I stood in the doorway of his room for a moment. Then I went down the hall to my study. The safe was built into the wall behind the bookshelf, my idea, Margaret's approval, installed in 2001 when I had started accumulating documents important enough to need protecting. I moved the bookshelf, worked the combination, and pulled the door open. The will was in a manila envelope labeled in my own handwriting, Last Will and Testament, Walter J. Greer, executed March 2020. I had drawn it up with an attorney 5 years ago, the year after Margaret died, when the reality of being the last person standing had made certain practical matters feel suddenly urgent. In the state of California, a person of sound mind may execute a will at any time and may revoke or amend it at any time without notifying any beneficiary. The will belongs entirely to the person who made it, not to the people named in it. Ethan had no legal claim to its contents until the moment I died, and not even then if I chose otherwise. I opened the envelope and unfolded the document. The language was formal, the way legal language always is, precise and bloodless, designed to leave no room for the kind of misunderstanding that grief tends to produce. I had read it twice when the attorney first prepared it, and not since. Now I read it again, slowly, standing in my study in the early morning light. To my son, Ethan James Greer, I leave the property at 4 Maplewood Drive in its entirety, along with all contents therein, and the remainder of my estate after charitable distributions. I had written that in the first year after Margaret died, when the grief was still so immediate and shapeless, that doing anything for Ethan had felt like the only way to keep from coming completely apart. I had written it because he was my son, and because I had believed at that time without question, without evidence to the contrary, that being his father was the most important and durable thing about me. I folded the document carefully. I put it back in the envelope. I placed the envelope on the desk and looked at it for a long moment. Then I heard Ethan's voice from upstairs, calling down through the ceiling, the way he had called down since he was a boy, casual, expecting to be heard, not considering whether I might be in the middle of something. "Dad, we're leaving in an hour. Don't wait up." I stood in my study and I did not answer. I looked at the envelope on the desk. I looked at the fireplace in the corner of the room, the one I had never used, because this room had always been too small and too full of paper to trust a fire in it. I picked up the envelope. I thought about what Sandra Whitmore's text message had said. I thought about the footage I had not yet watched, but somehow already knew was there. I thought about 2 words spoken in the dark of a hallway. "You're right." I put the envelope in my jacket pocket. I would not burn it yet, but I would not put it back in the safe either. I had 1 hour before they left. I intended to use it. I went inside after the last car turned the corner and did not come back. The house felt different the moment I closed the front door behind me. Not quieter, it had been quiet for years, the specific quiet of a place built for more people than currently lived in it. It felt different in the way a room feels different after someone has gone through it looking for something. Slightly disturbed, slightly off-center, like a picture frame that has been moved a 1/4 inch and then replaced close enough to write that most people would not notice, but not close enough that you could stop noticing. I stood in the front hallway for a moment. Then I walked to my study. 3 years ago, after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood, 2 houses on Maplewood, 1 on Fernwood, all within 6 weeks, I had installed a security camera system throughout the house. 8 cameras total: front door, back door, driveway, garage, living room, kitchen, upstairs, hallway, and the study itself. Ethan had stood in this same room while I showed him the setup on my laptop, watching me navigate the interface with his arms crossed and an expression of tolerant amusement on his face. "Dad," he had said, "nobody's breaking into your house. You don't have anything worth stealing." I had not argued the point. I had simply finished the installation and filed the login credentials in the small notebook I kept in my desk drawer, the one Margaret had called my paper brain, because I had always trusted handwriting over passwords and still did. I opened the laptop. I logged into the camera system. The interface showed 8 live feeds in a grid, all empty now. All recording with the patient indifference of machines that do not care what they capture, as long as they capture something. I clicked on the living room feed and opened the archive. The system stored 90 days of footage. I scrolled back 3 weeks to a Thursday evening in late June when Ethan and Claire had been staying for what Claire had described as a quick visit. and what had stretched as their visits tended to into 11 days. I had been in bed by 10. The timestamp on the footage read 11:47 p.m. I pressed play. The living room was dim, only the lamp by the sofa was on, casting a low yellow light that caught the edges of things without fully illuminating them. Ethan and Claire were on the sofa. Donald and Sandra Whitmore were in the two armchairs across from them, the good armchairs that Margaret had reupholstered herself the summer before she got sick. Donald had his ankle crossed over his knee in the posture of a man who was comfortable and intended to remain so. Sandra had her hands folded in her lap. They were talking. I turned up the volume. Most of it was ordinary, a conversation about a restaurant the Whitmores had tried in Pasadena. Something about a friend of Sandra's who had recently sold her home in Arcadia for more than asking price. The California real estate market. The way certain neighborhoods had changed. I watched the four of them talk, and I thought for a strange moment how normal it looked. How like a family. Then Donald Whitmore leaned forward in Margaret's armchair and said, "So what's the plan, son, long-term?" Ethan glanced at Claire. Something passed between them, quick practice, the shorthand of two people who had discussed this before and knew exactly which version they were presenting tonight. "Long-term," Ethan said, "this place comes to us. It's just a matter of time." Sandra Whitmore tilted her head. "Your father's still quite healthy, isn't he? He's 67. Ethan said it the way you state a fact about whether not unkind, not kind, simply informational. He's not going to live forever. And honestly, between you and me—" He lowered his voice, and I leaned closer to the laptop speaker without meaning to. "He's already starting to slow down, getting forgetful. I've been keeping an eye on it." This was a lie. My mind was as sharp as it had ever been. My physician had told me so at my last physical 6 months ago, with the particular satisfaction doctors take in delivering good news to patients they expected to disappoint. Donald nodded. "And the property itself, you have a sense of what it's worth." "Enough," Ethan said. He smiled a smile I recognized because I had seen it on his face his entire life, the smile he produced when he wanted someone to believe he knew more than he was saying. "Let's just say we're not going to have any financial problems once the situation resolves itself." "Once the situation resolves itself." Sandra repeated the phrase slowly, turning it over, tasting it. Then she smiled at Claire. "You've raised a practical man." Claire laughed. "I married one." Donald raised whatever he was drinking. "To patience," he said. The four of them lifted their glasses. I stopped the playback. I sat in my study chair, and I looked at the frozen image on the screen, 4 people in my living room, in my chairs under my roof, drinking what was almost certainly from my liquor cabinet, toasting to the eventual resolution of my existence. The lamp by the sofa, the one Margaret had chosen at a lighting store on Colorado Boulevard, after 45 minutes of deliberation, cast its low yellow light across all of them with perfect democratic indifference. I closed the laptop. I reached into my desk drawer and took out the small notebook my paper brain Margaret had called it. And I found the page where I had written Marcus Cole's information 7 years ago, when Marcus had helped me refinance the property. Marcus had been in real estate for 25 years. He had sold me this house in 1993. He knew what it was worth, and more importantly, he knew what it could be worth to the right buyer. I picked up my phone. My hand was steady. My heart rate was, as best I could measure it, completely normal. This surprised me. And then it did not, because I understood that what I was feeling was not rage. It was clarity, the specific, clean clarity that arrives when you have finally stopped arguing with a truth you have known for a long time. I dialed Marcus Cole's number. He answered on the second ring, and I said, "Marcus, it's Walter Greer. I need to talk to you about the house on Maplewood." A brief pause on his end, the pause of a man recalibrating. Then he said, "Walter, I was wondering when you'd call." I pulled the phone away from my ear for a moment and looked at it. Then I said, "How soon can you be here?" Marcus said he could be at the house by early afternoon. I thanked him and hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet of my study, the phone still warm in my hand. Through the window, I could see the driveway, the concrete I had poured in 1993, still solid, still level, marked now only by the tire tracks Ethan's SUV had left when it backed out an hour ago. I looked at those tracks for a long moment. Then I opened my laptop again. I had not looked at the joint credit card statement in 4 months. This was my own fault. I had set up automatic payments 2 years ago when Ethan told me it would simplify things, and simplifying things had turned out to mean that I stopped paying attention. The card was a secondary account linked to my primary checking, what the bank called an authorized user arrangement, meaning that I was the account holder. My name was on the contract, my credit score was the one that mattered, and I was legally responsible for every dollar charged to it. Ethan was an authorized user, which meant the bank had issued him a card in his name that drew from my account. I had done this 4 years ago when he told me his own credit was temporarily complicated, and that he just needed something to fall back on for emergencies. I logged into the bank's website and pulled up the statement. The most recent billing cycle ran from June 15th to July 15th. I scrolled to the transaction list and started reading from the top. The first charge was from June 22nd. The Langham Huntington Hotel in Pasadena, 847. I stared at that number. The Langham was one of the finest hotels in the greater Los Angeles area, the kind of place with a Sunday brunch that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. I had driven past it 100 times. I had never been inside. Below it, Nobu Malibu, $612, June 24th. Below that, Malibu Wine Safaris, $380, June 24th, same day. I kept scrolling. A spa in Santa Barbara, $290. A private boat charter company in Marina del Rey, $100. A restaurant in Beverly Hills I had seen featured on a travel program Margaret used to watch, the kind of place where the menu had no prices, because the clientele was not expected to concern themselves with such things, $934. I pulled up a second chair and sat down because my legs had made a unilateral decision about whether standing was appropriate for this moment. The charges ran for 3 weeks. I added them up twice because the first total did not seem real. $4,863, charged to an account in my name from a card I had issued for emergencies spent on hotels and restaurants and boat charters for a vacation I had not been invited to attend. I thought about the morning I had put down 70% of the down payment on Ethan's SUV. 18 months ago, at a dealership in Glendale, I had written a check for $31,000 because Ethan had said he needed reliable transportation for work and his finances were in a difficult patch. He had shaken my hand in the dealership parking lot with the particular firmness of a man who wanted you to feel the sincerity in his grip. He had told his in-laws at a dinner I had cooked 3 weeks later that he had recently purchased a new vehicle, no further details, no mention of whose money had made it possible. I had said nothing. I had passed the bread and refilled Donald Whitmore's water glass and told myself it did not matter who got the credit, as long as the bill was paid. I looked at the statement on my screen. The bill was always paid. That was the arrangement. And the arrangement, I now understood, had not been about convenience or simplicity or falling back on something during a difficult patch. The arrangement had been about access, steady, quiet, invisible access, to a resource that Ethan had long since stopped thinking of as belonging to anyone other than himself. I picked up my phone and called the bank. The automated system answered, and I navigated the menu with the patience of a man who had been navigating automated phone systems since they were invented, which was the patience of a man who had learned that hurrying them accomplished nothing. When I reached a representative, a young woman who identified herself as Courtney, I told her I needed to remove an authorized user from my account, effective immediately. "Of course, Mr. Greer," Courtney said. "Can I get the name of the authorized user, Ethan James Greer? And the reason for the removal, just for our records." I looked at the statement on my screen. The Langham Huntington, Nobu Malibu, a boat charter in Marina del Rey. $4,863. "I've decided I no longer need the arrangement," I said. Courtney told me the removal would be processed within 24 hours and that a new card would be issued to me automatically. She asked if there was anything else she could help me with. I said no, and thanked her, and ended the call. I sat back in my chair. The study was very quiet. On the desk beside my laptop was the manila envelope containing my will, still in my jacket pocket. Where I had put it that morning, I had taken the jacket off when I sat down and draped it over the back of the chair, and the envelope made a slight rectangular shape against the fabric. I looked at it for a moment. My phone rang. An unknown number, a 626 area code, which was Pasadena and the surrounding area. I almost let it go to voicemail, then I answered. "Mr. Greer." A woman's voice, professional, slightly hesitant in the way of someone delivering information they were not certain would be welcome. "This is calling from the Patient Services Department at Huntington Hospital. We're reaching out to confirm an update made to your emergency contact information approximately 4 months ago. We just need to verify." I sat forward in my chair so quickly that I knocked the laptop mouse off the desk. "I'm sorry," I said. "What update?" The woman on the phone took a moment to respond, and in that moment I became aware of 3 things simultaneously: that my hand was gripping the phone harder than necessary, that the laptop mouse I had knocked off the desk was lying on the floor beside my left foot, and that the room had gone very still in the way rooms go still when something important is about to be said inside them. "Mr. Greer," she said carefully, "our records show that your emergency contact information was updated approximately 4 months ago. The previous contact, listed as Ethan James Greer, relationship son, was removed and replaced with a new contact. I'm calling because our system flags updates to emergency contacts for patients over 65 just as a standard verification. We like to confirm directly with the patient that the change was intentional. What is the new contact name?" My voice came out level. I was proud of that. A brief pause, pages turning or the digital equivalent. "The new contact is listed as Donald R. Whitmore. Relationship is listed as family friend." I picked the mouse up off the floor. I set it back on the desk. I did this carefully, the way you handle something when your hands need something to do so the rest of you can keep functioning. "Mr. Greer, can you confirm whether you authorized this change? In the state of California, a patient's emergency contact information is considered part of their protected medical record. Only the patient themselves has the legal authority to alter it. A family member, even a son, cannot walk into a hospital and change that information without either the patient's written authorization or a legal document establishing medical power of attorney, which Ethan did not have had never asked for, and which I had not granted to anyone since Margaret passed. What Ethan had done, presenting himself at Huntington Hospital 4 months ago and requesting a change to my file without my knowledge or consent, was depending on how the hospital's front desk staff had handled it, somewhere between a serious administrative violation and outright fraud. "No," I said. "I did not authorize that change." The woman's voice shifted, still professional, but with a new layer of concern underneath it, the concern of someone who understood exactly what that answer meant. I see. In that case, we'll need to restore your previous emergency contact information, and I'll need to flag this for our patient services director. Can you confirm who you'd like listed as your emergency contact going forward? I thought about this for exactly 1 second. My sister, I said. Patricia Ann Greer. I'll provide her number. I gave Patricia's number from memory. The woman read it back to me twice. She told me the correction would be processed today, and that someone from patient services would follow up within 48 hours regarding the unauthorized change. She apologized 3 times in the particular way that hospital staff are trained to apologize sincerely but carefully, with no admission of institutional liability. I told her I appreciated the call. I meant it. I set the phone down on the desk, and I sat very still. 4 months ago. I had been in this house 4 months ago. Ethan and Claire had visited for a long weekend in March, ostensibly to help me sort through some of Margaret's things that I had finally decided I was ready to deal with, clothes mostly, and a few boxes of books she had been meaning to donate. Ethan had spent most of that weekend on his phone. Claire had organized Margaret's closet with an efficiency that I had told myself was helpful, and that I now understood had been reconnaissance. At some point during that visit, Ethan had gone to Huntington Hospital and told them that my emergency contact needed to be updated. He had removed his own name. He had put in Donald Whitmore's name, his father-in-law, a man I had met 11 times in 7 years, a man who did not know my medical history, my allergies, my physician's name, or as far as I could tell, anything about me that was not directly relevant to the value of the property I was standing in. I thought about what that meant in practical terms. I was 67 years old. I had a mild heart condition, well managed, nothing alarming, but the kind of thing that meant a hospital might need to reach someone quickly on a bad day. If something had happened to me in the past 4 months, a fall, an episode, anything, the person the hospital would have called was Donald Whitmore, not Ethan, not Patricia. A man who called me by my last name at family dinners, and who had 4 months ago been designated without my knowledge as the first person to be notified if I was dying. The implications of that settled over me slowly, the way cold water settles into clothing, not all at once, but thoroughly reaching every layer until there was nowhere left that was not affected. I stood up. My legs held, which I was grateful for. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. Margaret's roses along the south fence. The Meyer lemon tree, heavy with fruit. The garden I had tended for 6 years in her absence with the faithfulness of a man who understood that some promises do not expire. I should have told you, I said aloud, not to the room, to her. Margaret had never trusted Claire. She had said so exactly once, 2 months before she died, in the careful way she said difficult things quietly, without drama, looking straight ahead, rather than at me, as if the words were easier to release when she did not have to watch them land. I had told her she was being unfair. I had told her Claire was just different from us, that she came from a different kind of family, that she would grow on us both given time. Margaret had nodded and said nothing further. She was the most gracious person I had ever known, and one of the ways that graciousness expressed itself was in her willingness to say a hard thing once, and then let you arrive at it yourself. I had arrived. 6 years late, but I had arrived. I turned away from the window. The study felt smaller than usual, the walls closer, the air thicker. I picked up my phone again and pulled up Patricia's name in my contacts. My finger hovered over the call button. Not yet. There was something I needed to do first. I went to the fireplace in the corner of the study. It was a small one, original to the house, with a cast iron grate I had cleaned and blacked every fall for 32 years, out of habit more than necessity. I had not used it in years. But it worked. I knew it worked, because some things, if you build them right and maintain them honestly, continue to work long after you have stopped paying attention to them. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the manila envelope. I held it in both hands. Then I walked to my desk, sat down, and placed it in front of me without opening it. Not yet. There was one more thing I needed to see first, and then I would be ready. Patricia answered before the second ring finished. This was typical of my sister. Patricia Ann Greer was 70 years old, retired from 31 years of teaching high school English in Portland, Oregon, and she had the particular alertness of a woman who had spent 3 decades managing classrooms full of teenagers, always present, always slightly ahead of whatever was coming next. She had driven down to Los Angeles when Margaret died and stayed for 3 weeks without being asked. She had cooked and cleaned and sat with me in the evenings without requiring me to talk, which was the most useful thing anyone did for me in those first months. I had not told her enough times what that had meant. "And Walter," she said, just my name. The way she said it told me she had been expecting this call. "How long have you known?" I asked. A pause. Not the pause of someone deciding whether to tell the truth, but the pause of someone deciding where to begin. About Claire and the will specifically, 3 years. She called me in the spring, April, I think maybe early May. She said she was worried about you, that you were isolated, that you were struggling financially, that Ethan was doing his best to help, but that the estate planning you had in place wasn't fair to him, given everything he did for you. I let that sit for a moment. The study was very quiet around me. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower started up a small domestic sound, completely indifferent to the conversation happening inside my walls. "She asked you to talk to me," I said. "She asked me to suggest that you update the will. She framed it as concern for your well-being. She said she just wanted to make sure Ethan was protected." Patricia's voice tightened. I told her no. I told her that your estate planning was your business, and that if she had concerns, she should raise them with you directly. She said she didn't want to upset you. She was very pleasant about the whole thing. That was what bothered me most, how pleasant she was. "Why didn't you tell me?" The pause this time was different. Heavier. "I tried, Walter. I called you that June and I started to say something, and you told me Claire was just trying to look out for the family and that you didn't want to hear criticism of her because it put Ethan in a difficult position. You said it very kindly, but you said it." I thought back to that June. I remembered the call. I remembered telling myself Patricia was being protective in the way older sisters sometimes were seeing threats that were not there, reading bad intentions into ordinary concern. I remembered being pleased in some quiet part of myself that Claire was thinking about the family's future, that someone was. "I'm sorry," I said. "You were right. I know." Her voice softened. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done a long time ago," I said. "I'll call you when it's done." I hung up. I sat for exactly 30 seconds. Then I picked up the manila envelope from my desk, stood, and walked to the fireplace in the corner of the study. The cast iron grate was cold and clean. I had not used this fireplace in 2 years, but I kept a box of long matches on the mantel, out of the habit of a man who believed that useful things should be kept ready. I took a match from the box. I held the manila envelope in my left hand. I thought about the March afternoon in 1995 when Ethan was 11 months old and had pulled himself upright for the first time, using the leg of this desk, wobbling on 2 unsteady feet, with an expression of absolute astonishment on his face, looking up at me, as if he needed confirmation that what was happening was real. I had been the only one there. Margaret was at the grocery store. I had knelt down on the floor and held out my hands and said, "Come on, buddy, come on." And he had taken 3 lurching steps before sitting down hard on the floor and looking up at me with enormous eyes. I struck the match. The envelope caught at the corner first, a small orange flame that moved inward with quiet determination. I held it over the grate and watched my son's name burn. Ethan James Greer. The letters darkened and curled and came apart, and I held on until the heat reached my fingers, and then I set what remained in the grate and watched it finish. It took less than 2 minutes. 32 years of assumption, 5 years of legal language, 1 sheet of paper. Less than 2 minutes. I went back to my desk. I picked up my phone. I made the first call. "This is Henderson Lock and Key." A man's voice, businesslike, faintly bored. "I need every exterior lock on my property rekeyed today," I said. "All entry points. Front door, back door, garage, side gate. I need new keys, cut 2 copies only, both for me. Can you be here by noon?" A pause while he checked his schedule. "We can do 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock is fine. It's 4 Maplewood Drive." I ended the call and made the second one immediately before I could slow down and think about what I was doing in a way that might complicate the doing of it. Marcus answered on the first ring this time. "Walter, I'm already in the car." "Good," I said. "There's one more thing I need you to do before you get here. I need you to make some calls. Developers, investors, whoever you think is the right buyer for a corner lot in this neighborhood. I don't want to list it on the open market. I want a private sale, fast and clean, and I want the best number you can get me." "I already have someone in mind," Marcus said. "I've been watching this area for 2 years. There's a development group out of Pasadena that's been acquiring corner lots in this zip code for a mixed-use project. The zoning change was approved 6 weeks ago." A brief pause. "Walter, are you aware of what that approval does to your property value?" I was not. "Tell me." He told me. I sat down slowly in my desk chair. I had known the house was worth something. I had not known it was worth that. The number Marcus said was not the number I had been thinking about when I started this morning. It was considerably larger. It was in fact almost exactly 3 times larger. "Call them," I said. "Tell them I want to move quickly." "I'll have someone there by tomorrow morning," Marcus said. I put the phone down on the desk. The study smelled faintly of smoke, the clean, papery smell of something ordinary that has been reduced to ash. Outside, the lawnmower down the street had stopped. The neighborhood was very quiet. I looked at the empty grate, at the small pile of ash that had been my son's inheritance, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not anger. Something simpler and stranger than either the particular lightness of a man who has just put down something very heavy and has not yet fully registered that his hands are empty. I had one more call to make, but that one could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, for the first time in longer than I could easily remember, I was going to sleep before 10 o'clock. The locksmith arrived at 1 o'clock exactly. His name was Danny, according to the embroidered patch on his shirt, and he was efficient in the way of a man who had rekeyed enough locks to have stopped thinking of them as anything other than a mechanical problem with a mechanical solution. He worked through the front door, the back door, the side gate, and the garage in under 2 hours, and when he was done, he handed me 2 keys on a plain metal ring. No decorative fob, no label, just 2 identical keys that opened every exterior lock on the property and asked me to sign his work order. I signed. I tipped him $20 in cash. He drove away. I stood in the front doorway with the 2 new keys in my palm and looked out at Maplewood Drive. The street was quiet in the way it always was on a Saturday afternoon in July. A few cars passing, the sound of a backyard pool somewhere to the south, a pair of kids on bicycles moving slowly down the sidewalk with the aimless industry of children who have nowhere particular to be. Normal. completely normal. The kind of afternoon that had nothing to do with what was happening inside this house. I went inside and put one key in my desk drawer. The other I put on the hook by the kitchen door where I had always kept my keys, the same hook Margaret had installed in 1994 because I kept leaving my keys in random places, and she had decided the solution was a designated location that I could not argue with. I had not argued with it. I had used that hook every day for 31 years. Ethan had a key to this house. Or he'd had one. It was on the same ring as the key to his apartment and his office, a ring he kept in his left jacket pocket with the unconscious habit of a man who had never had to think about whether he was welcome somewhere. That key now opened nothing. I found I had no feelings about this that I could easily name. Marcus called at 4 o'clock. The development group was interested more than interested. They had driven past the property twice already that afternoon, which told me they had been watching this corner for some time and had been waiting for exactly this kind of call. Marcus said they wanted to see the interior tomorrow morning. I said fine. He said the preliminary number they had mentioned was consistent with what he had quoted me on the phone. I said I understood. We agreed on 9 o'clock. That night, I made dinner for one. Scrambled eggs and toast and a glass of orange juice, the meal I made when I did not feel like cooking, but needed to eat something. I sat at the kitchen table and ate slowly and listened to the house. It made its usual sounds, the refrigerator, the clock, the soft complaint of the floorboards in the upstairs hallway that I had been meaning to fix for 15 years and now would not bother. I found that I did not mind the quiet the way I usually did. It felt for the first time in longer than I could easily measure like my own quiet. Like a silence I had chosen rather than one that had been left behind. I slept 8 hours. I had not slept 8 consecutive hours since Margaret died. Sunday passed slowly and well. Marcus brought the development group's representative through at 9, a composed woman in her 40s named Diane, who walked the property with a tablet and a tape measure and asked intelligent questions about the foundation, the utility connections, and the setback from the street. She did not ask about the family photographs on the walls or the garden in the backyard or the marks on the doorframe where I had measured Ethan's height every birthday until he was 17. Those things were not relevant to her calculation, and I did not offer them. She left at 10:30. Marcus stayed for another 20 minutes sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and told me the group would have a formal offer by Tuesday morning. I thanked him. He looked at me for a moment over his coffee cup with the expression of a man who wanted to ask something and had decided not to. "You doing okay, Walter?" he asked instead. "Better than I've been in a while," I said, and meant it. Monday was the quietest day. I worked in Margaret's garden in the morning, deadheading the roses, checking the drip irrigation, harvesting 3 lemons from the Meyer tree that had finally produced the way she had always promised it would. In the afternoon, I called my attorney and made an appointment for Wednesday to discuss the terms of a new estate plan, one that would redirect the bulk of my assets to a charitable foundation I intended to establish in Margaret's name. The attorney's assistant asked if I wanted to flag it as urgent. I said no. Urgent implied that something was in danger of not happening. This was happening. It was simply a matter of scheduling. Ethan called 4 times on Monday. I watched his name appear on my screen, and I let it ring each time not out of cruelty, but out of the understanding that there was nothing he could say that would change what I already knew, and nothing I could say that would mean anything until he had seen what was waiting for him when he came home. He sent 3 text messages. The first said, "Dad's signal's been bad. Everything okay?" The third, sent that evening, said, "Weather's turning. Might head back Thursday instead of Friday. Can you make sure the gate's unlocked?" I read each message once. I did not respond to any of them. Tuesday morning, the formal offer arrived by email. I read it at the kitchen table with my coffee, the real coffee this time, hot the way I liked it. The number was exactly what Marcus had said it would be. I read it twice, not because I doubted it, but because some numbers deserve to be read more than once before you agree to let them change your life. I forwarded it to my attorney with a single line, "Please review before Wednesday." Then I put my phone in my pocket and went out to the backyard and sat in the garden chair I kept under the pergola and looked at Margaret's roses for a long time. They were in full bloom, deep red, the color she had chosen from a catalog in the winter of 1997, holding the page up to the kitchen light and asking me if I thought it was too dramatic. I had said I thought it was exactly right. I still thought so. Tuesday evening, Ethan sent one more message. "Weather's actually pretty bad. Thinking of heading back tomorrow instead. Can you open the gate Wednesday afternoon? We might bring Claire's parents back for dinner." Claire's parents, Donald and Sandra Whitmore, coming for dinner. To my house. I set the phone face down on the arm of the garden chair and looked at the roses until the light faded and the garden went gray around me, and the first stars appeared over the roofline of the house I had built with my own hands 32 years ago. I was smiling. I was not entirely sure when that had started, but I was smiling a small, still expression that had nothing to do with happiness in any simple sense, and everything to do with the particular feeling of a man who knows exactly what is coming and has made his peace with all of it. Wednesday morning, I woke at 5:30, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table to wait. I heard them before I saw them. 3 vehicles turning onto Maplewood Drive make a particular sound, the combined engine noise arriving a few seconds before the cars themselves come into view like an announcement. I had been sitting in the kitchen since morning, working through a second pot of coffee and reading a paperback novel I had taken from Margaret's shelf, a mystery she had bookmarked halfway through and never finished. I had been meaning to read it for 6 years. It turned out to be very good. I found I was able to concentrate on it in a way I had not been able to concentrate on anything in a long time. At 3:58, I heard the engines. I set the book face down on the table, spine up, keeping Margaret's bookmark in place. I walked to the front window and looked through the curtain. The black SUV came first, turning the corner, with the unhurried confidence of a vehicle whose driver believed he was returning to something that belonged to him. Behind it, Claire's silver crossover. Behind that, the rented minivan, which I now understood, had been brought specifically to transport the Whitmore luggage in the style to which the Whitmores apparently felt entitled. All 3 vehicles moved in the same loose convoy they had left in 4 days ago, and for a moment watching them come down the street, I felt the strange, doubled sensation of a scene repeating itself, the same cars, the same order, the same driveway waiting at the end of the block, but not the same locks, and not the same man standing inside. Ethan pulled up to the gate and stopped. Through the window, I watched him put the SUV in park and step out with the easy movement of a man who expected the next 30 seconds to be routine. He was wearing the same pale blue polo shirt from Saturday morning, slightly wrinkled now the collar bent on one side. He reached into his left jacket pocket and produced his keyring, house key, apartment key, office key, all on the same ring, the ring he had carried in that same pocket for years, without ever having to think about what it opened. He put the key in the gate lock. He turned it. Nothing happened. He tried again, jiggling the key slightly the way people do when they are not yet alarmed, just mildly puzzled, operating on the assumption that the problem is mechanical and temporary and will resolve itself if approached with slightly more force. The key turned freely in all directions, engaging nothing because it was now the wrong key for this lock, and the lock did not care how many times it had been opened before or by whom. Ethan stepped back. He looked at the key in his hand. He looked at the lock. He looked at the key again with the expression of a man whose mental model of a situation has just encountered information that does not fit, and who has not yet decided what to do with the information. In the SUV, Donald Whitmore's window came down. "Everything all right up there?" "Fine," Ethan said. "Just a second." He tried the keypad next the electronic entry panel mounted on the gate post, which I had installed 3 years ago, as a secondary access point. He punched in the 4-digit code he had used for 2 years. The panel beeped once, a short, flat sound, and the small light stayed red. Wrong code, or rather the right code for a system that no longer existed, replaced now by a new code that lived only in my desk drawer and in my memory. Claire stepped out of her crossover. She walked to the gate with her arms crossed and looked at the panel, then at Ethan, then at the house. "Why isn't it opening?" "I don't know." Ethan's voice had changed. The ease was gone. Something tighter had replaced it. "Did you try the code?" "Yes, I tried the code." "Try it again." "Claire, I tried it." Behind them, Sandra Whitmore climbed out of the minivan with the slow deliberateness of a woman who had expected to be inside and comfortable by now, and was recalibrating her expectations with visible displeasure. Donald followed her, straightening his jacket, looking at the gate with the assessing expression of a man tallying an inconvenience. Ethan called my phone. I watched it ring on the kitchen table where I had left it, screen up, his name glowing. I let it ring through to voicemail. He called again immediately, the second call of a man who believes the first one simply wasn't heard. I let that one ring too. Then I picked it up and answered. "Dad." His voice was clipped, controlled, working to stay that way. "What's going on? The locks are changed." "I know," I said. A pause. "Can you come open the gate?" "I'm already coming," I said. I put the phone in my pocket. I walked through the kitchen, through the living room, out the front door, and down the porch steps, and across the lawn to the gate. I moved at my own pace, not slow enough to be theatrical about it, not fast enough to suggest urgency. There was no urgency. Everything was happening exactly as I had expected it to happen. Ethan was standing at the gate with his key still in his hand. Claire stood slightly behind him. Donald and Sandra were near the vehicles watching. The minivan driver, a young man I had never seen before who had apparently been hired along with the vehicle, was leaning against his door with his phone out, deliberately not paying attention. I stopped on my side of the gate. Ethan looked at me through the iron bars with an expression I had not seen on his face before, or perhaps I had seen it when he was a child. The particular look of a boy who has just discovered that something he took for granted has limits. "Dad, what is this? What does it look like?" I asked. "It looks like you changed the locks." He said it as a statement, but the inflection made it a question, the question being why, the expected answer being that there had been some kind of mistake or misunderstanding that I was about to clear up. Just then, a white truck turned onto the block and pulled up to the curb in front of the house. Two men climbed out. They lifted a large sign from the truck bed, white background, black letters, the red logo of the real estate firm Marcus had contacted. They carried it across the lawn and began setting the mounting posts into the ground directly in front of the gate. Donald Whitmore walked forward 3 steps and read the sign. His mouth opened slightly. He looked at Ethan. He looked at me. He looked back at the sign. For sale. Sandra Whitmore made a sound that was not quite a word. Ethan looked at the sign, then at me, and for the first time in 4 days, maybe for the first time in years, I had his complete and total and entirely undivided attention. "Ethan," I said, keeping my voice level and clear. "You told me last Saturday that I wasn't family. You told me I was a burden." I looked past him at Donald and Sandra, then back at my son. "So I have a simple question for you. What rights does a burden have over someone else's property?" Nobody answered. The sign crew finished their work and climbed back into their truck and drove away, and the sign stood in my front yard in the late afternoon sun, and the 3 vehicles sat in the street behind my son packed with luggage from a vacation I had not been invited to attend, and the gate between us stayed closed. Ethan stared at me through the iron bars for a long moment. Then his face did something I had not seen it do in many years. It cracked. Not into tears, not yet, but into something rawer and less controlled than the smooth confidence he had been wearing since Saturday morning, the way a plaster wall cracks before it falls. Are you serious right now? His voice came out louder than he intended. I could tell because he flinched slightly at the sound of it, the way people do when their own volume surprises them. Dad, this is insane. Open the gate. No, I said. What do you mean, no? He stepped closer to the bars, close enough that I could see the tension working in his jaw. This is our home. You can't do this. It's my home, Ethan. It has been my home for 32 years. The deed has one name on it, and that name is mine. I kept my voice even, not cold even. There is a difference. Cold is a weapon. Even is simply the truth delivered without decoration. You told me last Saturday that I was not family. You told me I was a burden. I've had 4 days to think about that, and I've decided you were telling me something important about how you see this arrangement. I think it's time I responded accordingly. Claire stepped forward beside Ethan. Her jaw was tight and her arms were crossed, and she was looking at me with an expression I recognized, the expression she wore when a social situation had deviated from the script she had prepared, and she was rapidly drafting a new one. Walter, this is completely unnecessary. Ethan was stressed. People say things when they're stressed. Claire. I said 4 days ago you told me not to ruin your trip. Through a closing car window. I looked at her steadily. I didn't ruin your trip. I'd like you to extend me the same courtesy now and let me handle my own property without commentary. Her mouth closed. Behind them, a screen door opened across the street. Then another. Jim Haverford came out onto his porch and stood there with his coffee mug, not pretending to do anything else. The Peterson woman appeared at the edge of her driveway. 2 more neighbors materialized at the end of the block, drawn by the particular social gravity of raised voices on a quiet residential street on a Wednesday afternoon. I had lived on this street for 32 years. These people knew my face the way they knew the shape of the oak tree at the corner as part of the fixed landscape of where they lived. They were watching now with the careful attention of people who understood they were seeing something that mattered. Donald Whitmore had moved to stand beside his daughter. He was composing himself, visibly pulling the authority back into his posture, the way a man does when he realizes the situation requires him to perform competence. Now look, he said, addressing me with the measured tone of someone accustomed to resolving disputes from a position of seniority. I think there's been a misunderstanding here that we can all work through like adults. Nobody needs to make any hasty decisions. I looked at Donald Whitmore. I looked at him for long enough that the pause became its own statement. Then I said, Mr. Whitmore, 4 weeks ago in my living room, you raised a glass and toasted to patience. I heard every word. His composure flickered just for a moment, just enough. I've been patient for a long time. I've decided I'm finished with it. Donald's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Sandra Whitmore took a step backward, a small, involuntary retreat, the movement of a woman recalculating how exposed she was. Ethan turned to look at his in-laws, then back at me. Something was happening behind his eyes, the rapid, uncomfortable arithmetic of a man adding up numbers he had been deliberately avoiding. What are you talking about? What living room? What toast? Ask your father-in-law, I said. The afternoon had gone very still. Even the street sounds seemed to have quieted, no cars passing, no lawnmowers, just the light wind moving through the oak tree at the corner and the faint sound of someone's wind chimes 2 houses down. Then a voice came from my left. Walter. Harold Burton was 69 years old, broad across the shoulders, with the deliberate movements of a man who had worked with his hands for 40 years before retiring from a career in electrical contracting. He had lived in the house directly next to mine since 1994. He had been there when I finished the framing, had helped me hang the drywall in the garage on a Saturday, in exchange for a case of beer and Margaret's pot roast. He had shoveled my driveway twice after Margaret died, without being asked. He had stood on his front porch last Saturday morning and watched Ethan drive away, and had looked at me with an expression I had not been able to read. I could read it now. It was the expression of a man who had been waiting for permission. He walked to the fence line between our properties and stopped there, not coming onto my lawn, respecting the boundary the way he always had, but planting himself in a position where everyone on the street could see and hear him clearly. "I've lived next door to this man for 30 years, Hal said. He was not shouting. He did not need to. His voice carried the way voices carry when what is being said is simply true and does not require amplification. I watched him build this house. I watched him raise his son in it. I watched him take care of his wife when she got sick, and I watched him keep this place running alone after she passed." He paused. He looked directly at Ethan. "I also watched him get left behind in his own driveway last Saturday morning, by his son, in front of all of us. Nobody spoke. The wind chimes 2 houses down made their small, indifferent music." Ethan's face had gone the color of old concrete. "I should have said something then," Hal continued. "I didn't. That was my mistake." He looked at me. "I'm saying something now." He stepped back. He crossed his arms. He stayed where he was, a 69-year-old retired electrician standing at the property line between our 2 houses, and he did not move, and he did not look away. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then my phone rang, and I looked at the screen and saw Patricia's name, and I answered it on the first ring and switched immediately to speaker, because what my sister was about to say needed to be heard by everyone standing in front of that gate. "Walter," Patricia said. Her voice was clear and steady and carried across the afternoon air without difficulty. "I should have told you this 3 years ago. I'm going to tell you now." I held the phone out so the speaker faced the street. It was a deliberate choice. Patricia's voice deserved to be heard clearly without distortion by every person standing on that sidewalk and in that driveway and on those porches. I had spent 32 years in this neighborhood, being the man who handled things quietly, who absorbed difficulties without complaint, who kept his private business private because that was how he had been raised, and because he believed for most of his life that discretion was a form of dignity. I still believed that. But there are moments when the private must become public, not for the sake of spectacle, but because the truth has been kept quiet long enough, and the people who benefited from that quiet have mistaken it for consent. 3 years ago, Patricia said, her voice traveling clearly across the afternoon air. A woman called me. She introduced herself as Claire, my nephew's wife. She said she was calling because she was worried about Walter, that he was lonely, that he was struggling, that the estate planning he had in place was outdated and wasn't fair to Ethan, given everything Ethan was doing for him. Nobody on the street made a sound. Even the wind chimes had gone quiet. She asked me, Patricia continued, to talk to my brother, to suggest that he revisit his will. She said she didn't want to bring it up herself because she didn't want to upset him. She said it would be better coming from family. A pause. She was very warm about it, very concerned. She said she just wanted to make sure everyone was protected. I looked at Claire. Claire was looking at the phone in my hand with an expression that had gone absolutely still. Not blank, not empty, but the particular stillness of a person who is listening to themselves, being described accurately, and has no available response to the accuracy. I said no, Patricia said. I told her that Walter's affairs were Walter's business, and that if she had concerns, she should raise them with him directly. She thanked me very politely and hung up. And then I made a mistake. Her voice changed, something rougher coming into it, the roughness of a 70-year-old woman being honest about something she wished she could take back. I tried to tell Walter that June. He told me I was being unfair to Claire, that she was just trying to look out for the family. He said it very gently, the way Walter says difficult things, but he said it clearly enough that I understood the conversation was finished. Another pause. I should have pushed harder. I'm sorry I didn't. Pat, I said. I know, she said. You don't have to say it. I lowered the phone. The speaker stayed on, but I held it at my side, and Patricia's voice became quieter, more private, the way a conversation becomes when the part that needed to be public has been delivered, and what remains belongs only to the people who were always meant to hear it. Ethan was staring at Claire. His face had moved through several expressions in the past 90 seconds, shock, then something that looked like the beginning of understanding, then something harder and more personal. The expression of a man assembling a picture he had not wanted to see, but could no longer avoid. Claire was not looking at him. She was looking at a point approximately 18 inches above my left shoulder, with the focused intensity of someone who has decided that the best available strategy is to wait for this particular moment to end. 3 years, Ethan said, not to me, to Claire. His voice was very quiet. You called my aunt 3 years ago. Claire said nothing. Her jaw tightened. Claire. His voice got louder. 3 years ago, you called my aunt and asked her to convince my father to change his will, and you didn't tell me. It was a conversation, Claire said. Her voice was controlled, but the control was costing her. I was trying to protect our future. I was doing what you wouldn't do, because you were too... You did it behind my back. Ethan's voice cracked on the last word. You did it behind both our backs. Donald Whitmore placed a hand on his daughter's arm. It was a protective gesture, but the protection it offered was to himself as much as to her, the gesture of a man trying to keep the situation contained before it spread further in his direction. Let's all take a breath here, he said. Don't, Ethan said. He turned to look at his father-in-law, and what was on his face now was not the deferential expression of a son-in-law managing an important relationship. It was something rawer and less careful. You knew about this. Donald's hand dropped from Claire's arm. I knew Claire had concerns about the estate planning, yes. Concerns. Ethan repeated the word the way people repeat words when they are testing how much weight the word can hold before it collapses under the pressure of what it is actually describing. She called my father's sister and asked her to manipulate him into changing his will, and you call that concerns. Sandra Whitmore made a small sound and looked away down the street. I was watching all of this from my side of the gate with the strange, detached clarity of a man observing weather. I was not enjoying it. That surprised me because for 4 days, I had imagined this moment arriving and had assumed it would feel like something satisfaction or vindication, or at the very least, the relief of a balance finally restored. Instead, it felt like watching a structure I had lived in for years finally fall, which was necessary and which was right, and which was nonetheless a kind of loss. Hal Burton was still standing at the property line. He had not moved, and he had not spoken again since his initial statement, and his presence had become in the way that the presence of a calm and principled person sometimes does, a kind of ballast, something steady that the scene organized itself around without quite knowing it was doing so. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text message from Marcus. On my way. 5 minutes. The buyer's representative is with me. I looked up from the phone. Down the block, a car was turning onto Maplewood Drive, and stepping out of the passenger side before the car had fully stopped was a man I recognized, a broad-shouldered 40-year-old in a gray sport coat who had attended one dinner at this house 3 years ago and had been the only guest that evening, who had sought me out specifically to talk, who had asked me real questions about the house and the neighborhood, and my years as an engineer, who had shaken my hand at the end of the night with a grip that meant something. Ryan Calloway. Ethan saw him at the same moment I did, and the color that had been slowly returning to Ethan's face drained out of it again, completely and immediately, in the way that color leaves a face when the body understands something before the mind has finished processing it. Before I reveal the shocking truth in this folder, type "truth" in the comments so I know you're still with me. And a quick heads up. The next part includes dramatized story elements that might not be entirely factual. If you prefer not to continue, feel free to turn off the video right now. Ryan Calloway walked up the sidewalk at the unhurried pace of a man who had decided on his way over exactly what he was going to say and had made his peace with the saying of it. He was 40 years old, broad through the chest, with the kind of face that defaulted to calm the way some faces default to worry. Not because nothing troubled him, but because he had learned early that visible agitation solved approximately nothing. He had built 3 small businesses over 15 years, sold 2 of them, and was currently running the third, which was a commercial property management company operating out of offices in Burbank. I knew these things because he had told me himself 3 years ago at the dinner table in my dining room, speaking to me directly while Ethan talked to the Whitmores at the other end of the table about a business deal he was describing in terms that Ryan, I noticed then, was carefully not corroborating. He stopped at the gate. He looked at me first, then at Ethan. Ryan. Ethan's voice had gone flat. The flatness of dread, not the flatness of indifference, but its precise opposite, the voice of a man working very hard to sound like he is not afraid of what is standing in front of him. "What are you doing here?" "Marcus Cole called me," Ryan said. "He told me what was happening. I thought you should hear some things from someone who isn't your father." He glanced at me briefly, and what passed between us in that glance was the recognition of 2 people who understand each other's position without needing to discuss it. Then he looked back at Ethan. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this to you for about 8 months. Turns out this is the day." Ethan straightened. "Whatever you think you know." "Let me finish," Ryan said. Not harshly, simply. The way a man speaks when he has decided that politeness and honesty are not in conflict, and he intends to practice both simultaneously. 18 months ago, you came to me looking for investors for the Glendale project. I said no because the numbers didn't work, but I introduced you to some people I knew who operated in private lending, individuals and small groups who make short-term loans outside the banking system, faster and with less documentation than a traditional lender would require. You know who I'm talking about?" Ethan said nothing. A muscle in his jaw moved. "The way private lending works." Ryan continued, turning slightly so that his voice carried to the small audience that had assembled on the sidewalk and the neighboring lawns. "Is that the borrower provides something that gives the lender confidence. Sometimes that's a business asset, Sometimes it's a personal guarantee. In your case, Ethan, you told them you owned a property on Maplewood Drive. You gave them this address. He paused. You told them it was your house. The words landed in the afternoon air and stayed there. Donald Whitmore's head turned toward Ethan with the slow, mechanical movement of a man who is processing information that is rearranging several things he believed to be true. You don't own this house, Ryan said. He was not asking. You've never owned this house. The deed has one name on it, and it isn't yours. But you told 3 separate private lenders that you did, and you used this address as the basis for loans totaling. He opened the folder he was carrying and looked at the top page. $64,000. At interest rates that are, to put it generously, unfavorable. Claire made a sound. Not a word. A sound, the involuntary exhale of someone who has just heard a number they were not expecting, and whose body has registered the number before the mind has finished deciding how to respond to it. The $64,000, Ethan said. His voice had changed completely. The flatness was gone. What replaced it was something younger and less certain, the voice he had used at 12 years old when he had broken something and was trying to calculate how bad the consequences were going to be. Ryan, I was going to pay it back. The Glendale project was supposed to... The Glendale project collapsed 14 months ago, Ryan said. I know because you called me when it happened. You didn't mention the loans at that point. You also didn't mention that you had used your father's address to secure them. I was standing on my side of the gate listening to this, with the strange, quiet sensation of a man watching a house of cards come down. Not the house he had built, but the one that had been constructed in the space next to his, using materials taken from his property without permission. The feeling was not triumph. It was something more like grief that had finally found its correct shape. Ethan turned to look at me. His eyes were red at the edges. Dad, I was going to tell you. I was waiting until I had the money to... How long? I asked. He blinked. What? How long were you planning to wait? He didn't answer. There was no answer that would have worked, and I think he understood that, because what he did instead was drop his eyes to the ground in the manner of a man who has run out of available positions to defend. Ryan closed the folder. He held it out toward the gate, and I reached through the bars and took it. The folder contained 3 documents, printouts of loan agreements, each listing 4 Maplewood Drive as the borrower's property, each carrying Ethan's signature, none carrying mine. I looked at them for a moment. Then I held them where Donald Whitmore could see them. Donald looked at the documents. He looked at Ethan. Something moved across his face that was not quite shame and not quite anger, but lived in the neighborhood of both. Sandra Whitmore touched her husband's arm. He did not respond. He told us this house was his, Sandra said quietly. She was not speaking to me. She was speaking to the middle distance, to no one in particular, the way people speak when they are coming to terms with something in real time. And the coming to terms requires audible words, even if there is no intended audience. He's told us for years that this house was his. I know, I said. Marcus Cole's car pulled into the driveway behind the 3 vehicles. He stepped out with his own folder and looked at the assembled group, the Whitmores, Claire, Ethan, Hal, at the property line. The neighbors on their lawns, with the practiced calm of a man who had been in complicated real estate situations before, and understood that the complications were almost always personal rather than procedural. He looked at me. Walter. Ready when you are? I looked at Ethan. My son was standing in the street in front of the house he had grown up in front of the gate. He had walked through 10,000 times, and he was 38 years old, and he had $64,000 of debt and no property to his name, and a marriage that was visibly coming apart at the seams. and he was looking at me with the eyes of a boy who had finally understood too late that the floor he had been standing on had never belonged to him at all. "Give me 5 minutes," I said to Marcus. Marcus Cole had been selling real estate in the greater Los Angeles area for 25 years, and in that time he had learned that the most important thing about delivering a number was not the number itself, but the silence you allowed around it afterward, the space in which the number could expand to its full size and be properly understood by everyone in the room, or in this case, everyone standing in a driveway on a Wednesday afternoon in July. He opened his folder on the hood of Ethan's black SUV. The choice of surface was mine. I had asked him when he called to say he was 2 minutes away to put the paperwork on the hood of the black vehicle in the driveway. He had not asked why. Marcus was a man who understood context, and the context I suspected had been clear enough from the street. He smoothed the documents flat with his palm and stepped back so that everyone present could see them. The top sheet was the purchase and sale agreement, the formal offer from the development group, their letterhead at the top, the property address in the middle, and at the bottom, the number. The number that Marcus had quoted me on the phone 4 days ago. The number I had read twice at my kitchen table on Tuesday morning, because some numbers deserve more than one reading. The property at 4 Maplewood Drive. Marcus said, addressing the assembled group with the calm professionalism of a man who gave presentations for a living and had learned to read rooms quickly. Sits on a corner lot of approximately 8,400 square feet. 6 weeks ago, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors approved a rezoning designation for this corridor, transitioning from single-family residential to mixed-use commercial. What that means in practical terms is that this property is no longer valued as a house. It's valued as a development site. He tapped the number at the bottom of the page. "This is the offer currently on the table." Donald Whitmore moved forward. He was a man accustomed to numbers, or at least accustomed to the performance of being accustomed to numbers, and he looked at the figure on the page with the initial composure of someone who expects to be unimpressed. Then his composure did something I had not seen it do all afternoon. It genuinely failed. Not cracked, not flickered. Failed. His chin drew back slightly, the involuntary movement of a man whose body has absorbed information that his social training has not yet caught up with. "That's..." He stopped. He looked at Marcus. "That's the offer. That's the accepted offer," Marcus said. He looked at me. "Pending Walter's signature today." Ethan pushed forward to the hood of his own vehicle and looked at the number. The transformation that moved across his face happened in layers, the way weather moves across open ground. First the stillness of non-comprehension, then the slow dawning of comprehension, then something that had no clean name, the expression of a man watching the specific thing he has spent years wanting reveal itself to be vastly larger than he had imagined it to be at the exact moment it became permanently unavailable to him. His lips moved. He was doing arithmetic. I could see it happening, the involuntary calculation of a man whose mind had gone immediately to percentages and portions, and what his share might have been, would have been, should have been in a world where the house had eventually come to him the way he had always assumed it would. "That's 3 times what I thought it was worth," he said. His voice was barely above a murmur. "Closer to 3.5, Marcus said. Not unkindly, simply accurately, the way Marcus delivered all information. Claire had come to stand beside Ethan. She was looking at the number with an expression I had seen on her face only once before at a charity auction 3 years ago, when a piece of artwork she had wanted had been bid past her limit by someone with deeper pockets. The expression of a woman who has lost something she considered already hers. Her hand found Ethan's arm. He moved away from the touch without looking at her. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but it was the kind of small movement that contains an entire decision inside it, and everyone who saw it understood what it meant. Donald Whitmore straightened. He turned to look at Ethan with an expression that had completed its transformation from prospective father-in-law to creditor who has just discovered the collateral was misrepresented. "You told me," he said, his voice dropping to a register that was meant for Ethan's ears only, but carried clearly in the afternoon quiet, "that this property was going to be the foundation of your financial future. You said it as though it were already settled." "I thought it was," Ethan said. "You thought wrong," Donald said. 3 words delivered without particular emphasis, which was somehow worse than if he had shouted them. Sandra Whitmore had stopped looking at the number. She was looking at her daughter with an expression I recognized, the expression of a mother recalculating a situation she had believed was under control and finding that the calculation requires different inputs than the ones she had been given. It was not a kind expression, but it was an honest one, and I found I had more respect for it than for most of what I had seen from Sandra Whitmore in the years I had known her. I walked to the hood of the SUV. I looked at the purchase and sale agreement, the address, the terms, the number. I thought about the afternoon in 1993 when I had signed the original deed for this property, sitting at a folding table in an empty escrow office with Margaret beside me, both of us, in clothes that were slightly too formal for the occasion, because we had not known what one wore to the most significant purchase of one's life, and had erred on the side of respect. Marcus held out a pen. I took it. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. Walter James Greer, the same signature I had been producing for 67 years, clear and unhurried, on the hood of the SUV that I had put $31,000 toward 18 months ago, that had carried my son's in-laws to a resort at my expense, that was now serving as the surface on which I formally transferred the property at 4 Maplewood Drive to people who would use it for something entirely different from what I had built it for, which was fine, which was correct, which was the right outcome for a house that had been treated for too long as an asset rather than a home. I put the cap back on Marcus's pen and handed it to him. "Congratulations, Walter," he said quietly. I nodded. I did not feel like celebrating. I felt like a man who has finished something very large and is standing in the particular silence that follows large finishings, waiting to understand what comes next. I turned to face my son. Ethan was still looking at the signed document on the hood of his car. His shoulders had dropped in the way that shoulders drop when the last available argument has been exhausted and there is nothing left to hold them up. Claire was standing 3 feet away from him, which was the same distance she had been standing from him for the past 10 minutes, and neither of them had closed it. The sun was lower now, catching the chrome on the 3 vehicles and throwing long shadows across the driveway. The neighbors who had gathered were still there, most of them, because they understood that what they were watching was not finished yet. It was not finished yet. Donald Whitmore made his decision in the way that certain men make certain decisions, not with a dramatic declaration, but with a single small movement that contained the whole of it. He picked up his jacket from the hood of the minivan where he had draped it. An hour ago, shook it once to straighten it and put it on. He did not look at Ethan while he did this. He did not look at me. He looked at Sandra, and Sandra looked back at him, and between them passed the wordless agreement of 2 people who have been married long enough to conduct entire conversations without opening their mouths. Sandra reached into the minivan for her handbag. She settled the strap on her shoulder with the composed efficiency of a woman preparing to leave a restaurant where the service had been unacceptable. "We're going to find a hotel," Donald said. To Claire, not to Ethan. The distinction was precise and deliberate. "Call us when things are sorted out." Claire's face went white. "Dad?" "Call us," Donald repeated. He walked around to the passenger side of the minivan. Sandra was already moving to the other door. Neither of them said goodbye to Ethan. Neither of them looked at the for sale sign as they passed it with the particular determination of people refusing to acknowledge something they had been counting on and have now decided to pretend was never part of their plans. The minivan driver, who had been sitting behind the wheel for the past 40 minutes, with the determined invisibility of a man being paid to transport people and not to have opinions about their lives, started the engine. The minivan backed out of the driveway and drove away down Maplewood, and I watched it go. And I thought about the evening 3 weeks ago when I had watched the footage of Donald Whitmore in my living room, raising a glass and toasting to patience. And I felt nothing in particular about his departure, except the clean, factual acknowledgement that it had happened. Claire watched the minivan until it turned the corner. Then she turned to Ethan. "This is your fault," she said. Her voice had shed its social layer entirely. The pleasantness was gone. The management was gone. And what was underneath was something harder and more direct than I had heard from her in 7 years of Sunday dinners and family occasions. "You told me you had a plan. You told me this was handled. You told me your father was my father." Ethan's voice cracked on the second word. "You want to talk about my father now? You've spent 3 years treating him like a problem that needed solving, and now you want to invoke him as a reason this is my fault. I spent 3 years trying to protect our future because you wouldn't. Not in anger alone, in something more complicated. The tone of a man who is furious and ashamed simultaneously and cannot fully separate the two. You went behind my back to change his will, Claire. You didn't ask me. You didn't tell me. You just did it because you decided you knew best. And now here we are, and you want to stand there and tell me this is my fault. Your name is on those loan documents," she said. "Not mine. Because you told me we needed the money for the Glendale project. Because you told me it would be fine. Because you said, I never told you to lie about owning a house you don't own." The word lie stopped him. It stopped the whole street, or seemed to. A stillness moved through the assembled neighbors, the particular stillness of people who are witnessing something they had not expected to be permitted to witness, and are uncertain whether to stay or go, and are staying. I was standing at my side of the gate. I had not moved since I signed the documents. I was watching my son and his wife dismantle something in front of 15 people, and I was not glad about it. I want to be clear about that. There is a particular cruelty to watching a marriage come apart in public, not because the people in it don't deserve consequences, but because consequences delivered in public have a way of hardening into permanent shapes. And some of those shapes make repair impossible. I did not want repair to be impossible. But I was not the one who had brought them to this street corner on this afternoon. They had navigated themselves here by a series of choices made over several years, and I was simply the man who had finally stopped moving out of the way. Ethan pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. His shoulders were shaking. He was 38 years old, and he was standing in the street in front of the house he had grown up in, and he was coming apart, which was not something I had wanted to see, but which I had understood somewhere in the past 4 days was probably necessary, not as punishment, but as the beginning of something that could not begin until the current structure had finished falling. Claire looked at him. Then she looked at me. Then she picked up her car keys from the pocket of her jacket and walked to her silver crossover without another word. She got in. She sat in the driver's seat for a long moment without starting the engine long enough that I thought she might get back out. Then the engine started, and she pulled out of the driveway and drove away in the opposite direction from the minivan. Ethan lowered his hands from his face. He looked at the space where Claire's car had been. He looked at the gate. He looked at me. His eyes were red and his jaw was working, and he was trying to find something to say and not finding it. And after a moment, He stopped trying and simply stood there on the other side of the gate from his father, 38 years old, with no house and no in-laws, and a marriage that had just driven away in two separate directions, and $64,000 of debt that belonged entirely to him. Hal Burton had not moved from his position at the property line. He caught my eye across the yard and gave me a small nod, not of approval exactly, but of recognition. The nod of a man who has been a witness and understands that witnessing sometimes requires you to stay until the thing you are witnessing is complete. The other neighbors were beginning to drift back to their own lives. Jim Haverford went inside. The Peterson woman turned away from her driveway. The street resumed its ordinary sounds, a car passing the sprinkler system at the house 2 doors down, clicking on a dog somewhere registering a mild complaint about something only it could see. Ethan took a step toward the gate, then another. He stopped directly on the other side of the bars, close enough that I could see the dampness at the corners of his eyes, the way the afternoon light caught the gray beginning at his temples, that I had not noticed before the slight trembling in his hands that he was trying to control and not fully succeeding. "Dad," he said. Just the word. Just my name for him to use. All the things it had meant for 38 years compressed into a single syllable. His knees buckled. He went down onto the concrete of the driveway, slowly, not a fall, but a descent, the deliberate, exhausted lowering of a man who has run out of the strength required to remain upright. He was kneeling in front of the gate to his father's house, and he was asking for something, without yet knowing how to form the words for it. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I reached into my pocket for the key. I did not open the gate inward. I unlocked it from my side and pushed it outward away from the house. Away from the property. Away from everything that had been happening behind it for the past hour and a half. This meant I had to ask Ethan to move back, which he did, rising from his knees with the slow, effortful movement of a man whose body has been through something and is reporting back with the full accounting. He stood on the sidewalk, and I stepped through the gate and pulled it closed behind me. And for the first time since Saturday morning, I was standing on the same side of something as my son. He was looking at me the way he had not looked at me in years. Not the managed look, not the performed look, not the look he produced for social situations that required the appearance of filial warmth without the substance of it. This was the unmanaged version, raw, uncertain, younger than 38. The face of a boy who has broken something he understood too late was irreplaceable, and does not yet know if the word sorry is large enough to cover what he has done. "Dad," he started. "Let me go first," I said. He closed his mouth. He nodded. I had thought about what I wanted to say for 4 days. Not in the sense of rehearsing, I am not a man who rehearses, but in the sense of knowing gradually and then clearly what was true and what needed to be said and what did not. I had arrived at something by Tuesday evening that felt complete, and standing here now on the sidewalk outside my own gate, I found that it still felt complete, which was how I knew it was right. "I am still your father," I said. "I will be your father until I die, and I expect I will be your father in whatever comes after that, if anything does. That part does not change. That part was never in question." I paused to let that settle. But being your father does not mean being a resource you access when you need something. It does not mean being a building you intend to inherit. It does not mean being a name you use to borrow money from people who would not lend it to you on your own merits. I kept my voice level. The same voice I had used on Saturday morning, the same voice I had used throughout this entire afternoon, not cold, not performative, just even. The truth without decoration. It means I am a person who built something with his hands and his life and his marriage, and raised a son in it for 38 years, And somewhere in those years, you stopped seeing the person and started seeing the inventory. Ethan's jaw was working. His eyes were full, but he was not letting himself cry, which I recognized because I had watched him develop that particular restraint at age 9 when the other boys in his class decided that crying was something to be ashamed of, and I had never figured out how to tell him they were wrong about that. "I know," he said. His voice was rough. "I know that's what happened. I don't know exactly when it happened, but I know it happened and I—" He stopped, swallowed, started again. "I don't have a word for it. Sorry isn't—" He shook his head. "Sorry isn't the right size." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." "Then what do I—" His hands came up, open the gesture of a man who has run out of tools. "Dad, what do I do with this? How do I—" "I don't know," I said. "That's not something I can tell you. That's the part you have to figure out yourself, which is something I should have made you do much earlier and didn't, because it was easier for me to fix things than to watch you struggle with them, and that was my failure as much as anything else." He stared at me. "Your failure?" "Yes." I held his gaze. "I made it very easy to take me for granted. I paid for things without being asked. I solved problems before they became consequences. I made myself so available and so useful that you eventually stopped being able to see me as anything other than available and useful." I paused. That was not wisdom. That was avoidance. I was avoiding the harder version of loving you, which is letting you fail and watching you get back up. Something shifted in his face. "Not resolution. Resolution would take longer than this afternoon, longer than this month, possibly longer than this year. But the beginning of something. The recognition arriving slowly that the conversation he was in was not the conversation he had expected to be in. "I'm not punishing you," I said. "I want you to understand that. The house is sold because it was time to sell it. Because I have somewhere else to be and something else to do with whatever years I have left, and I am not going to spend them maintaining a property that someone else was already mentally dividing up." I looked at him directly. "I'm not angry with you. I'm disappointed in a way that goes so deep it has stopped feeling like disappointment and started feeling like something else. Like grief, maybe. Like mourning a version of you that I thought was still in there and am not sure about anymore." Ethan made a sound. Not a word, the sound a person makes when something lands precisely on the place that hurts most. "Is he still in there?" I asked. "The boy who used to come find me in the garage on Saturday mornings. The one who asked me how things worked. The one who sat with his mother when she was sick and held her hand and didn't need to be asked." Ethan pressed his lips together. A single tear ran down the left side of his face, and he did not wipe it away, which was the first honest thing I had seen him do all day. "I think so," he said. His voice was barely there. "Good," I said. "Then there's something to work with." I looked down the block, the familiar street, the oak tree at the corner, the late afternoon light on the houses I had watched for 32 years. Then I looked back at my son. "Come," I said. "Walk with me." He looked at me for a moment. This man who was my son, this stranger who was my son, this 38-year-old boy who was my son. Then he fell into step beside me, and we walked away from the gate and the sign and the empty driveway, down the sidewalk toward the end of the block. And neither of us said anything for a while, and the silence between us was different from every other silence of the day. Not the silence of avoidance or strategy or calculation, but the older, simpler silence of two people who are walking together and do not yet know where they are going, but have agreed for now to go there in the same direction. We walked to the end of Maplewood and turned left on Birchwood without discussing which way to go. This was how we had always moved through the neighborhood. When Ethan was a boy, I set the direction he fell in beside me, and we went at the pace of two people who had somewhere to be, but were not in a hurry to get there. Half a block passed before either of us spoke. "I need to ask you something," Ethan said. His voice was different now, scraped clean of the social polish left with something rougher underneath. "About the watch." "Ask," I said. He took a breath. "I took it 2 weeks ago while you were in the garden. I put it in my bag and I told myself I was borrowing it." He kept his eyes forward. "I put it back before sunrise, before we left. I sat on the edge of your bed for 10 minutes with a pen and a blank piece of paper, and I couldn't find a single word worth writing. Every word was an excuse, so I left it blank." "I know," I said. "I found it there." He finally looked at me. "I'd gotten to a place where I saw things in your house, and my brain had stopped registering them as yours. It started registering them as—" He struggled. "Inventory. The way you said." The word came back heavier in his mouth than it had left mine. We reached the small park at Birchwood and Elm. A wooden bench sat under a liquid amber tree Margaret had always loved. She used to collect the seed pods and keep them in a bowl on the kitchen windowsill. She said they looked like small planets. She said everything looked like something else. We sat. "What happens to you now?" Ethan asked. "Where do you go?" "I bought a place a year ago. A condominium on the coast, 40 minutes from here." I looked at him. "I've known for a while it was time to move on. Can I come see it?" "Yes, but you call first. And you come alone. Not to ask for anything, just to come." "Just to come," he repeated. The California dusk settled golden across the rooftops. Margaret used to say that golden hour was the day trying to apologize for whatever it had gotten wrong. I stood. "Come on. There's a diner on Rosecrans that's been there since 1987 and makes the best patty melt in the county. Let me buy you dinner before I leave this neighborhood for good." He stood. "Yeah, okay." We walked back toward Maplewood, and neither of us said anything more about the house or the money or this afternoon, because some things need time before they can be spoken about cleanly, and we had for the first time in longer than I could measure something that felt like time. The sale closed on a Friday morning in early August. I walked through the house one final time before the escrow officer arrived. Not to check anything, not to retrieve anything I had forgotten, but simply to walk through it the way you walk through a place that has held a significant portion of your life, and that you are choosing deliberately and with full understanding of what you are choosing to leave. The living room first. The oak floors caught the morning light the way they always had. Margaret's window seat was empty. I stood in front of the wall where the family photographs had hung for 20 years and looked at the nail holes remaining after I had taken them down. And I thought, that was the most honest thing a wall could show you, not the pictures themselves, but the marks left behind after they were gone. I took one photograph with me, the three of us at the Grand Canyon, Ethan furious about the hiking, Margaret laughing. The escrow officer came at 10. I signed where indicated. I shook hands. I walked out the front door and did not look back at the house. Not because looking back would have been wrong, but because I had already said what I needed to say to it over the past 3 weeks, in the quiet of early mornings, and the work of Margaret's garden, and the simple act of living inside it one last time with full attention. I drove 40 minutes south and west toward the water. The condominium was on the 3rd floor with a balcony that faced the Pacific. I had bought it 14 months ago, paid cash from savings I had accumulated over 30 years of working and living carefully, and had been paying its modest HOA fees while I waited for the rest of my life to arrange itself into the shape that would allow me to actually live in it. I made coffee. I carried it out to the balcony. December came quietly. Ethan called on the 15th not to ask for anything, not to explain anything further, just to say he had found an apartment he could afford and a therapist he thought he could talk to, and that he was figuring things out slowly, which was the most honest sentence he had spoken to me in years. On the morning of December 23rd, I sat on the balcony with my coffee and watched the Pacific move through its colors, gray first, then silver, then, as the sun cleared the hills behind me, a particular shade of blue that had no name I knew of, but that Margaret would have found a name for and would have been right about. I thought about her. I thought about Ethan. I thought about the house on Maplewood and the 32 years it had contained, and the afternoon in July when everything that needed to change had finally begun changing. I was 67 years old. I was sitting on a balcony above the Pacific Ocean with a cup of coffee that was still hot. I had nowhere to be, and no one waiting for me to fix anything, and I understood with the clean and uncomplicated clarity of a man who has finally arrived somewhere, after a very long drive, that this was enough. Looking back at my family story, I realized that blind love without boundaries only breeds disrespect. I thank God for giving me the clarity to stand up for myself before it was too late. Do not be like me. Do not wait 32 years to stop enabling those who take you for granted. A true family story should be built on mutual respect, not quiet compliance. Life is too short to let anyone treat you as a burden, even your own blood. Through sharing my personal narrative among other grandpa stories, I hope you find the courage to protect your dignity and boundaries. Every grandpa story's entry serves a purpose, and this raw family story is proof that setting boundaries is never wrong. If this resonated with you, please leave your thoughts in the comments, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more meaningful content. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Please note, upcoming grandpa stories contain dramatized elements crafted for educational and entertaining purposes. If you prefer strictly factual content, please feel free to exit now and choose a video that better suits your preferences.